All right, if you're just joining us, Linda Mnisi, thank you very much for that. If you're just joining us tonight, this is Newzroom Africa's continuing extended coverage of what is possibly the country's worst housing disaster in modern history. Over 70 people killed by a fire that destroyed the building right behind me, Osizweni, previously a shelter for abused women. When the lease lapsed, we're told then the building hijackers, criminals basically in central Johannesburg, took it over. There's been a long list of politicians, local, provincial, national, who've come here. Most recently, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was here in the last hour. Now, among the first politicians in Johannesburg to arrive was the Speaker of Council, Colleen Makhubele, who joins us now to talk about what she has witnessed here. Very good evening to you, Speaker. Thank you so much for your time. Describe first how you found this area when you arrived and what you thought.
Thank you so much, Tambeke, and good evening to our viewers. When we first came in the morning, I think it was still a shocking experience because we still had the deceased bodies here. They were still on site. Some were still being taken out of sight. And the fire was also still a bit active at the time. And between then and now, we can see, of course, that I think the fire has died down now. The bodies have left. 73 people reported, 74 died, 49 or more still in hospital. It still leaves a bitter taste because we still have not established what is the cause of the fire and where are the perpetrators, where are the hijackers of this building. That's what we want to know, and what is happening with those hijackers. But also what I also want to appeal, especially to the foreign nationals that have been injured, that have loved ones as well that are deceased, please, they must not be afraid to come out and talk to us. We are at a stage of a crisis. We want to assist all of them. Let them go to hospital to be treated. We are not going to be looking at documentation today. We know most of them are hiding out. They don't want to go to hospitals, and they need attention. This is a humanities crisis. It's not just a Joburg crisis, as you've seen the president was here. It's a national crisis. I like what the president said. This is a shared blame. We're not going to be pointing fingers. National must take responsibility. Immigration laws, home affairs, justice system that fails us. The city is taking responsibility. The building was not compliant. It's hijacked, and we left it, to be hijacked since 2013 or so. What is saddening me a lot before I get to the responsibility of the citizens is that this is a heritage building. If you understand the history of this nation, this was called Lindelani, where the men were brought from different provinces to wait for their dome passes here, and there was a little court up there. We failed to treat it as a heritage building and preserve the history. We allowed illegal foreigners to come and occupy it. So we have to take that responsibility as a city. But what
do you mean you allowed illegal foreigners to occupy it? Were they the only people in the building?
They were not the only people in the building, and I'm coming back to that. Not just illegal foreigners, but most of them are the financiers behind this project. I don't know what is this scheme and this whole gang of these building hijackers, but most of them, the ones that have the masterminds and the ones that finance all of this kind of shenanigans, it comes from the illegal foreigners. But I want to appeal to our citizens because they also play part in it. Lawlessness, ill-discipline, you don't report issues. You can't have a building like this housing 400 families. This is a 5-story building, and inside there it's demarcated in shacks, and our people are in there. Why was this not brought to the attention of the authorities by our own people? So we've embarked on civic education for people to understand that to be in a world-class African city, we need world-class African citizens who can abide by the bylaws, report criminality, and let us know as a city what is going on inside of their buildings and not be partakers of all of this criminality.
But Speaker, if you know who is behind these rackets, why aren't we seeing a total shutdown, an end to this? Why aren't people being arrested? And by that I mean by the hundreds, because as we're being told, hundreds of buildings are actually being occupied illegally.
If you remember, MMC Kunene came aggressively, taking over the hijacked building, demolishing them, and NGOs came crying out for human rights. And this whole thing of NGOs focusing on human rights of criminals instead of understanding the broader picture as well. human rights of everybody, citizens in this city, the rights of the city to do its job. They prevent us from working. We need to also look at our constitution. It allows and has a loophole on this kind of things. It's not different from where you go to informal settlements that are built by the flood lines, and now the rainy season is coming, they're going to be flooded. When you try to remove them, because the constitution says you must find them alternative accommodation, and we don't have the budget for it. So there's so many factors that bind our hands from operating, but mainly because they're using the justice system. The court are giving court orders on these things without proper context and understanding, and we need everybody, all the stakeholders, to play their role. If it's an illegal building and there are people there occupying illegally, we do not expect the court to give us a court order to say do not do anything about it, don't evict people, give them alternatives. We cannot keep funding criminals, we cannot keep funding lawlessness. It is dragging the city down, it is allowing us to have tragedies like this at the end of the day.
Quick final question, and briefly, ma'am. The NGOs say their issue is not the protection of criminals, but saying, as you yourself have touched on, that by law, because this is South African law, you cannot evict people without an alternative place for them to stay. Do you believe that shouldn't be the law, that when you evict people, whoever they might be, that they should be left on the streets to figure it out, basically?
Look, there's context to everything. And you cannot protect people who have illegally occupied a building. And you want to go and defend them in the court of law, to say now the city must spend money, our tax money must be spent to get them alternative accommodation. When the city has demarcated to say this is proper housing, if you're coming correctly into the city of Johannesburg, this is where you stay, this is how we accommodate you. So I don't buy that story. If NGOs want to protect human rights, let them start with the human rights of these kids now that have been left desolate without parents. Kids that are shocked in this city now. What about the human rights of every other person that has been impacted and affected by criminality that has happened? I know there are innocent people in the process as well. And this is why we always say you know consciously when something is wrong. You cannot come into a 5-story building and you have 400 living there and you think it's normal. It is not normal. I want the NGOs to find proper causes to advance human rights, and will support them, but they must not hinder the city from working and then allow this kind of things to happen. They should be here, actually, those who are defending this whole thing, to come and talk and tell us how do they feel now that people have died and they were defending a section of the population. You know, MMC Kunene had to get even extra protection because he had death threats, and all of these NGOs were all over him, threatening him. And it was such a big issue. His house had to be protected, his family had to be protected. What for? Trying to prevent things like this.
I appreciate that, but there's also the issue, and you said at the beginning that you weren't apportioning blame, but you quite clearly blame the NGOs. What about government? Because there's also been a failure by government. You know a problem exists, you've not dealt with it. And it's not the NGO's job to provide accommodation, to keep people safe. You have all failed as different levels of government.
Certainly, I've said in the beginning, this is a shared blame, and I've apportioned blame to each and every party. The city itself, we are now going to do serious oversight on all the buildings that are here from the legislature, because clearly there's something that we are not doing. We don't understand where these buildings are. We need a record, a register of all the hijacked buildings that we know of. We need somebody to put up a task team that is going to go and audit all the buildings that are here for compliance and all of that. You look at this building behind you, you can immediately see that it's overcrowded as well. We just don't know how many people are here, how compliant it is, etc. So we are going to be zooming into that as legislature now and provide proper oversight and understand what's happening. Blame is apportioned everywhere. Citizens, the city, national, NGOs, all the stakeholders must take accountability. But what is important now is that we respect the lives that have been lost. We send our condolences, and we'll do everything in our power as the city of Johannesburg to attend to all of them, irrespective of who they are, assist their families, and also bury the deceased in dignity.
Johannesburg Council Speaker Colleen Makhubele, good to speak to you. Thank you for your time. The Johannesburg Council Speaker Colleen Makhubele, among the many politicians who are still out here in Marshalltown tonight, as the people who've been left destitute by last night's fire are being taken to alternative accommodation. We're told 3 shelters have now been provided. A very good evening to you. If you're just joining us, it's 7:03. You're watching a special edition of News at Prime on Newzroom Afrika with myself, Timbekile Mkhototo, live for you from Marshalltown, the scene of what is possibly the country's worst ever housing disaster under a democratic dispensation. Close to 80 people killed as a fire tore through in the early hours of the morning, tore through a building that was illegally occupied. No clear indication, as we stand here on the streets of Marshalltown, of just how many people lived in the building. What we know is that dozens died, dozens were injured, and many more could still die in hospital. The youngest victim of this fire, a child, a 1-year-old, one of 13 children who lost their lives yesterday or in the early hours of this morning because of decisions made by the adults.